some of the, um, I've seen that, the series, so thank you for including me, and I apologize again for the technical issues here. And so I was going to show my moccasin identifier program because that's what I do now, mainly, and that in there it talks about our relationship with the land, and that you have just done the treaties, and that is our little moccasin identifier project is the meeting is being live streamed, it says. All right. The project that first of all, who am I? I'm Carolyn King. I'm a member of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I was born on the adjacent Six Nations of the Grand River, but I've been here married into the here 53 4 years ago, and that I also have a I have a deep bloodline here. My grandmother was a member of the Mississaugas, and that she was a good name, Etobicoke, and that when you talk about Etobicoke, over on the other side of town, I guess it's over from you guys, right? And that the Etobicokes were part of the family that goes right back to Toronto, right further back to the travel from the north and stuff like that. So I have a good Indigenous bloodline to the both First Nations, and that so. And I've lived the other things. I have lived on an Indian reserve all my life. I was born and raised over on in Shwégon, and that. Let me get this. Yeah, the tech person told me I'm sitting beside a window, and he says, "Close your window." Gets too much bright light, and that. So I'm saying I've lived here all my life and worked for both communities, Six Nations and New Credit, or the Mississaugas of the Credit, as we call ourselves now. We took out the new. We were Mississaugas of the New Credit, and our location is New Credit. Our First Nation name is Mississaugas of the Credit, and so they have gone back to that. Just Mississaugas of the Credit. Our location is still what we call New Credit, and the so people said, "Why did you do that?" If you know some of our background, we're the treaty holders. Treaty 13 is the Toronto Purchase from 1805, and that was settled in 2010. So it took over 200 years to settle that claim. Treaty 13A, right next door, is you can refer to where Peel, city of Mississauga, is, and that it's it identifies us as treaties are the colonial instrument that lets the world come and live here in that process, and that the what do you call them? People sometimes don't understand that as First Nations we talk about our treaty lands, and that for those who previously participated in the talk, there was 2 sessions on treaty with I think Mr. Ovid there, and that I always like in my speeches I have to identify that you hear us say our treaty lands and traditional territory, and that I explained that treaty is the colonial document, the instrument that allowed the of land and all the people come and live here, and the treaty lands are pre-colonial, and they are what the First Nations, the Indigenous people themselves, describe as their understanding of where their land is. So if you look at on our map, if it goes through to Julian, it shows that we have treaty land, and then there's a black line that identifies where the where we recognize the traditional territory, and it goes beyond where those treaty things are. And the other kind of significant thing about treaties and traditional territory, the treaties are where like kind of like the straight lines come in, and the traditional territory generally followed geographic, the physical layout of the land, whether it's to the water's edge, the height of land, or significant, well, woodlots and trees, things like that, escarpments. There's lots of areas that how they get described, but that's the way we understood. And the people, the original people before colonial changes and influences, they it helps understand that why we say that. And that I was just talking to Sagin earlier today, and that they claim the whole Bruce Peninsula as their traditional territory, and they have hunting lands up there where they go to hunt and fish and gather, as opposed to just on what's called the Indian Reserve. So anyway, I was I've been a worker, volunteer, leader in the community, basically forever. I worked here. I started working as a community economic development in the office of the community economic development, and I was got involved in planning, environment, everything about the First Nation. You get involved in to help develop your own community, and that I've basically been doing that all along. I was part of original land use planning, setting up the community plan for the community, and supporting all kinds of different programming, library, cultural committee, radio station, different office programs and services that the community didn't have and wanted. So I've been a part of all that, what I call community development, which means everything. And that, oh, I didn't say my traditional name. It also means first lady and woman who does everything. And the tick on the side of it is that woman who knows everything, or maybe thinks she knows everything. But anyway, so I've been very much involved in First Nations, trying to get our treaties recognized. And I was part of the Toronto Purchase, when I was chief in 1997 to 99. I was actually elected as the chief of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. First woman ever elected, and only woman since. So it's a claim to fame, I guess. So I've been involved in like the political side of things a lot, and a lot of the work I do today is kind of mostly on the political side. And that we get involved in, like why are we claiming the land? Why do we want to be recognized? And so in your series, in this part about talking about our responsibility to the water and the land, we would talk about all of the land, the whole environment, the world that we live in, and the different mindset, philosophy, the different values of the First Nations people and their connection to the land. We all claim to be stewards of the land and protecting the land and the waters. So protecting the environment, and you hear our people talk, we're always talking about protecting the land. And if and understanding the First Nations people, it's not just about the Indian Reserve they live on, which is, like I said, identified by the federal government and moved us off of our territories onto a small piece of land for us to live on, so that they could take the land. And that's no different for Toronto. The Toronto Purchase was created to take the land so that the British government of the day could take the land, all of that land, and make it the capital of the Upper Canada at the time. And our First Nation, the Mississaugas of the Credit, has 23 land, like, what they call cessations of the lands or treaties, where we agreed for the taking of the land in order to have, like, people are going to live here, and they're going to, as I say, share the resources of the land. And if you talk to the First Nations, that did not happen. Even as the Mississaugas of the Credit and the treaties that we have along the Credit, the Etobicoke, and all the rivers that flow into Lake Ontario, and Toronto has like Etobicoke, the Humber, and the Don, and the Rouge over on the east side, that we were supposed to have like a buffer land that went up along the side of each of those rivers, and to have the right to come back and hunt and fish and gather on those lands. And for a couple of those treaties, it's written right into the treaty, and it still never happened. So when you hear our First Nations talk about respecting the treaty rights, it goes back to those treaties. They are still very legal, and the First Nations, they understand where their land is. And it's just that the other levels of government don't. And often I say that our people, it was a sharing agreement, or an understanding that we're going to be sharing the land with the new people that come to live on it, and that we were always going to be able to go back to it and use it for whatever, whether it was hunting, fishing, gathering, or medicine sites, or to travel on. And the governments and the settlers that came in, they were told that it was their land. A business transaction had taken place, and that they now owned it. And if you read back in the history, you'll see stories about how the First Nations tried to go back to the land to hunt and fish and gather. And that there's an interesting story about along the Humber there, where the person had his section of land, and he wrote a letter to the government, and he said he didn't know what he was supposed to do, that the Indians, be it the Mississaugas, came back mostly in the springtime, but basically on the seasons, they went back and along the banks there to fish and gather. And he said, like, what am I supposed to do? They say they have a right to come back here, but I have a deed that says it's my land. So you say, so what actually happened in those kinds of encounters? They put up fences to stop the people from coming back, or they set the dogs on them, or physically banned them from coming onto the land. So it's a long, long history about the loss of land for the First Nations, and that loss equates to loss of access to the waters that was very, like, integral to their way of life. Our people used the water for everything, like for hunting and for fishing, for transportation, and for just livelihood. And to lose that access, and so see us as the Mississaugas. Our name comes from Mississauga, means body of water with many mouths, and we were on the waters before, but then with settlement, and we were moved away. In our case, the Mississaugas moved away from the Toronto because it was getting too settled, and there was too many people. And I say that oftentimes I get back in there and I'm late, and I say, the same reason we had to leave this land is the same reason we can't get back. There's too many people, and the people don't understand our way of living, and they don't want to. What I've found is over the years, they don't want to understand. They want to come in and just take over and make it theirs. That's what colonialism is, where they just come and occupy and throw everything that's on the land away and make it theirs. So that's what we're living with today. The only thing is, our people were there then, and we're still here. We're just not living on that you say in the case of Toronto, we're not living there. I think I have on the list about 23 people who are members and who actually still live in Toronto, but they don't have any different rights than because they're living there. And it's not on land that is what we call set aside or set apart from other places. So the loss of access to the water is it's so integral to the life, and to have lost it, I just can't imagine the impact that loss of water did to our people. A cultural shift, basically, to move off the water and move on to land where there was no water right adjacent to you. So, in early days, that people went back to try use the water, and it wasn't possible. And on the land, and we talk about how our people live with the land, it's sort of respect for the land, and that it's what provides your life, food, shelter, for your people to live. I was recently asked in a session, was there indigenous principles for land use planning? And I first of all said, well, I don't know, basically the same as anybody else's, any other people. But I said, I'll make a couple notes. And so I wrote down, and I've been sharing this, that first of all, you don't build in the floodplain, because the water is the water and it will always come back to you, and be upset that you're living on the land and just come back and wash you away. So you don't build in the floodplain. Our people use that for growing, because it be what do you call fertile land. You look for the height of land, and that is, like for us, like say in Toronto, the land claim says height of land and to the water's edge. And so, or a physical thing like a tree, the blaze tree, that would identify where the boundary is. So don't build in the floodplain. Look for the height of land. Look for resources. It's going to have resources for you to live. Look for an area that you're going to be protected, that you can protect yourself if something's happening around you. And 5, don't build in the floodplain. Can't stress how important that is. And that's so, the waters seem to be, as we hear in the modern day news today, they seem to be, waters are rising all over the place, all over the world, all over here in Ontario and Northern Ontario. And, Toronto itself experienced high level water from the Great Lakes in 2017, like recent things, 2019, where the Toronto Islands were flooded and people were, had to adjust for all of the water that was around. I know we're doing some planning studies with the city right now. So the those are just, things that I think any people would do, but for sure, it wasn't all the technology we have today, and, to protect yourself from the different environmental things that happen. That seems to be happening in our lifetime anyway, these dramatic environmental impacts on us. So the land, like I said, it provides the food sources and the stability to live on land. Here in Ontario, where we're land people, definitely not coastal water people, nor are we mountain people. And that's so often for Ontario and the Anishinaabe, which is the umbrella name to identify us. Anishinaabe then includes the Ojibwe, which includes the Mississaugas. That's so we are often called Great Lakes people. And so you see where our land is. We come from the north side of Georgian Bay there up at Blind River, and come all the way down, all the way around Lake Simcoe, and then into Toronto, and some of our people went out to the eastern side. So we're part of the Toronto side that occupied the land there until from the 1600s until 1847, when there was a conscious move. As I said, that we kept getting impacted, influenced, or pushed away, pushed aside by the settling government, and they started to lay out the land into people, for the colonial people property, give them property to live and build. And that's what we got today. You know, the history will talk about it. You know, they basically, history talks about all the built history and how good it was that they came here and built all their business and houses and buildings and stuff like that. And our people were pushed aside and set on reserve, as we call the little postage stamp of land. And so here we are as the Mississaugas. We're now here, but we were at the mouth of the Don River, and then we moved over to the Credit down along. Well, we were at all of the lakes, all of the rivers, and then we settled in what's now known as the Credit River. And if you drive the 401 or any of the major highways going east-west, you'll cross over the Credit River. Originally, it was called Missinini, meaning trusting river or quiet river. And today it's called the Credit River. And you say, so how did that happen? Because people say, how did we get Credit River? Well, the story comes from our relationship to living on the land there. And back in the 1700s, we traded with the British and the French for furs, for good, traded furs for good, pots and pans, axes, material things that, that were maybe new style of things for our people. And that sometimes the story goes that there wasn't enough, there was not enough pelts to meet the trade. We definitely question that today, but that's what was done. And our people it would get put on credit or on tick, and we often say, and that so in order to keep good relationship with the fur traders, when they came back in the next season, they would pay up, or somebody in the community would pay up. And in the history books, they became known as the Good Credit Indians. And then the name stuck as River Credit. And then the river took on the name, the Credit River. And still sticks today. So that's why it's called the Credit. And the city, as we know, the city of Mississauga is right at the mouth of the Credit River. And that's so all of that is connected to our First Nation. And we go back there and we have relationships with all of the areas there. And you say, well, and as I said earlier, about that, even though there are the land there's a treaty or cessation of land, but we still have a connection to the land. That's where our ancestors are buried, and that there are still important places that happened in our history that link us intricately to the land. And we promote that anybody living on it, that they live, protect the land. And sadly, it seems like we're losing that, where open land is just looked at as another place to make a dollar, build something, and make people pay taxes for it. So it's just like in contradiction to the way that the indigenous people, and I'll say indigenous people of the world, have lived. All that's being influenced and changed today, but they lived in sync with the land. And I guess you might say didn't take it for granted. And as we know, we just went through a big storm on Sunday, or Saturday, Sunday, when the storm went through. It was just Saturday, I guess, because we were having a party here.
Saturday, yeah.
Saturday, yeah, and the dark cloud. They were saying severe storm warnings. The dark clouds rolled through, we were out there saying, okay, Creator, just keep it going that way, keep it going that way. And we were, we didn't get anything other than some wind. We did not get any rain other than people who were driving in um, from Toronto, all the different places that people came, and that it was pretty scary. And they saw the trees whipped up, bent over, and things flying around. A couple of people turned back; they didn't even come because of that. But I guess we lose respect for Mother Earth, as we call her, because she gives us our life. That we would be, coming back to get us. And I never forgot this one saying that I was reading an environmental book, and they said, well, what he said, what about why you have this, environment, like you're so adamant about protecting the environment, the land and the plants and the water. And the person said back to him, well, you can never turn your back on Mother Earth or on the earth, because it will come back to hit you when you're not looking. And so I just remember that it was how the whole environmental start of the book was it started with that little part. And I go, yeah, can't ever turn your back, because something's going to change there. So going back to the water and our responsibility for the water, it is it really belongs to the woman who gives birth and basically holds the responsibility to give birth to the next generation, and with water. So water becomes a ceremonial part of our life. We just did a naming ceremony on the weekend, early Saturday morning, and that water is part of that. The women looks after the cup of water. We use copper cup to share the water, and that just to acknowledge, that the water is such a part of giving of life. So even in our ceremonies, as like a naming ceremony, we honor the water, and it has a place in our life, our indigenous life, to in ceremony and practices, that we want that water to be available. We want it to be good water, and that we can use it in, even for drinking, but also for washing, and also for fishing, that we can get food from there. We had fish both days of our little open house that we had, and that fish came from the Georgian Bay, or up at Nipissing. And my husband used to go fish in those places because they got cleaner water and good fish. And that's so just being able to have access and to be able to use those as an Indigenous person. I think that's such a important part that we need to keep and be aware of, and we want to make the rest of the world aware. And there are lots of things that our First Nations, and if you didn't know, in Ontario there's 133 First Nations, and most of them are on the water. The Mississaugas of the Credit, we moved, even though it was consciously that we decided to move away, but it was forced because of settlement. So we lost access to the land. And all the other First Nations are along the waters. I was just talking to Saugeen, as I mentioned, and that I was saying, so what do you do? Because they are right along the water. They're with Nawash, which is Cape Croker up on the Madras Peninsula, and they have a water claim in order to that they want to be able to. They want a commercial fishing. So many things have happened by the government to take away our rights, that inherent rights. We lived on the land and lived with the land, and that it was the colonial laws, governments that came in, and most of it comes from Britain, and that very structured and very limiting, and everything was about taking the land and any of its resources to make themselves better. And that so when we look to say that we hunt and fished, well, then they just want to give us the right to fish for our livelihood. Yet the Cape Croker or Saugeen, it's Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, San we call them, and that they fought for the right for commercial fishing, and they could go back in the records, and that they fished up there in Georgian Bay and Lake Huron in their case, and they traveled south into Toronto to sell the fish. They actually had a booth to sell at St. Lawrence Market. So when the government says that you can just fish for your daily life, sustenance activity, they could prove that they sold fish for sale, for livelihood. And so that's the way. People don't understand the kind of limitations and restrictions and banning of our activity that was done to our people, and that access to water has been one of them, and the way that we use the resources. It was okay for them to come and cut all the trees down and dig up the land and take the resources out of the land, but it wasn't okay for us to use it. And that if you haven't seen the Indian Act, I mean, there's all of this information and wonderful information series, just like you guys have been putting forth, about what was supposed to happen under treaties and what didn't happen, and why our people still fight for it. And when we talk about, how do we practice our still today, and the impact it the way we are. Because, if you came to the reserve here, you would say, oh, geez, they live just like us. But when you cross that line onto the Indian Reserve, you are in a literally different country. The Ontario laws don't apply here. So it gets a little bit difficult to enforce things. So that's where if you hear news across the country, it's the RCMP, the Royal Mounted Police, that enforce laws in places. And they will even, we have, there's Six Nations has local police for enforcement. It's what's called special constables. And other First Nations have that. And then they have, we have OPP, a community policing agreement. So we give them, permission to come and enforce the law around here. So you can get caught driving without a license here. So you can't get caught like that over on Six Nations. So every community is different, and depends on how they run their First Nation. And so it's always like a challenge for people to understand who we are, where we are, and why we are. And that so having information sessions like this is important to tell people. And so on when I talk about, I was trying to share my PowerPoint for the moccasin identifier. I've worked in that area for a long time, where we look up, I might as well say forever in my working life, that we being employed by the First Nation and promoting who the First Nation was and sharing our information, and that and being part of settling land claims. That if you go to our First Nations website, it's called we're called the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and all you do is just look for that, and you look at if you go online, the web, and you look for First Nations in Ontario, we'll be one of those. We're in the foot of Southern Ontario. Most are in the north part, but we're one of those, and we between us, Six Nations, and the Mississaugas of the Credit, we have good information on there. It tells you a lot about the First Nation rules and regulations and things like that you might have to deal with. But most of the people that can drive it up and down the roads like it's no different than any place else. It's just the different policing things that are in place. So they like I said, when it's a different because we're federal land, and as soon as you cross the road, it's provincial land and provincial laws. So A lot of times we abide by them. We're not legally responsible to deliver those types of things. So, but I think most First Nations do, and we have, you know, I think we're living pretty good, uh, considering that we don't have access to the resources that should have been ours, and that's what creates land claims. People don't realize that, what was in those claims and what does that mean today. The access that we were supposed to have, the sharing agreements, things that were supposed to happen, and every day you hear those with the First Nations about what was supposed to happen, and we were set aside. The word is set apart. They changed it, but so it's set apart for reserve land for the sole use and benefits of the members of that particular nation, and that so we look after it like we're a little government, have a chief and council, and we have and ours is an elected system as opposed to a uh, traditional system. There are communities that have traditional systems. Yet that's not one of us. We went into the elected system along like sort of 1781. So it's been a long time. And that no, I'm saying it wrong. 1871, and that we actually may be the First Nation to actually move to an elected system. So we'd already moved from the Credit River and Toronto areas and moved south here. The other side of our group, they went to other places. So we have a whole relationship with people who are in different First Nations, over in, like on the west side of Ontario, Kettle Point, areas there, up into over to the east, the Hiawatha First Nation, Aldervale, Mississauga, Scugog up at Port Perry there. So we have there are 6 communities, First Nations, that are take the name Mississauga, and many of those guys are all on water and relate to, directly that their communities are on water. We were just in Hiawatha last Thursday to meet the chiefs there, and that beautiful waterfront property there. So they advocate to and live the life beside the water, to not pollute, and to use it as for the resources to fish and to look after their community's needs with it, and they're pretty strong about doing that. And I was talking with them with Saugeen. They're right on the waterway over on Lake Huron, and Cape Croker is on Georgian Bay, and that they so when they talk about that, we have a responsibility to be good stewards of the land, and that we will, promote and look for protection of the land. And so they have, they create their rules about how they have to protect the land, and from basically from development and settlement coming in to impact them. And they have celebrations, that are just about the water. And I was looking for some background information here, and that the Chiefs of Ontario, they have a whole many years ago, they did a what's called a declaration, First Nations Water Declaration, it's called, in Ontario. And if you go on the website, the declaration is on there, and that is was done in 2016, October 2008. It was done, so that they look at First Nations in Ontario walk to the future in the footprints of our ancestors, and it promotes in there about sharing information about the First Nations and their connections to the water, and that all the things about the water, whether it's where the source water is, where it's coming in, but the waterfront, the shore, protecting the shorelines, and that teaching the people about their responsibility to care for the land and the waters. And that, so we're, even in this modern day, we're developing our own principles to fit the modern day world, to make sure that people also want to protect the environment and be good stewards of the land and protect the water that all of our people have to live on. And I think when we make that a key part of how we live our lives, and be thankful for what we have in the environment. And I often start my talks and I say, did you say thank you this morning? Chimigwit, big thank you, in Anishinaabe. Did you thank the creator for allowing you to be on this earth another day, to be able to, continue to live your life and create a future for your family? And that, it's so important if you do that. And, many people will do a smudge in the morning, or put tobacco down, call it sama, put tobacco down so that, they honor and putting tobacco down to the earth, to the trees, to the water, is all about saying thank you and honoring that for what it gives you in life. So it's an important part of our life. I tell people, I say thank you every day when I get up. And if we go and use parts of the plants, we put tobacco down, and we give our food for our ceremony we had. We take all the food and we make a plate for the spirit, and that food is given back to the earth, to say thank you. And so just what we can do in honoring the earth, the environment, which is mainly for us land and water, and the plants. Honor the plants that give us solid food, you might say. So anyway, I think that's our responsibility. We're hoping that all the people will do that and take that to heart about how we need to do that in order to live a good life, and to I guess help with the impacts of climate change. So maybe there's some questions.
Thank you. Caroline, so Julian here. Thank you so much for sharing. And yes, as you mentioned, like being thankful with the creation and with the water as well. It's really interesting. When I was learning about the four sacred medicines, and I was like, where is the water? And of course, it's kind of like the understanding how water is a medicine. And I just wanted to share that with you. I was always intrigued why the water is not mentioned in particular as a medicine.
Yeah, that's true. But it is part of it. It's just part of it. It's maybe not, identified specifically, but no, when the women come together, when we're going to do a water ceremony to take the water, and we've done it in Toronto many times. And so people don't really realize when we're going to do a ceremony, bless the land and bless the water, and that we have to, they give you 7 minutes on the agenda. And so I said, oh, the water ceremony is like 3 hours long, and you have to, we're going to come in and we're going to put tobacco down. And we did this right at the Harborfront Center out in front of and we did, we were doing a bigger event later in the day. And I said, it takes a long time. You can't just do it and say it. So we had to learn how to do something, address these shortage of time issues. So a group of us went in to do the ceremony, and that I can't make it stop.
It's okay.
And that so we did the ceremony on the water's edge, put tobacco down, drummed and sang and did prayers to thank the creator. And then we took the water, collected all the water, took it into the building, and they divided it all up into little cups, like little small 1 ounce cups. And then we told them what we did for them so that we could fit into the basically 10 minutes we took to do the ceremony. And that, so we can still do it, but, it takes, and women have a role to play in all of that because they're the water keepers, protectors of the water, and that generally you can't do a water ceremony without women. So, and we've done the ceremony. Our cultural advisor looked after the talking, and then the women did all the work with the water. And that night, so what we did is just give out the sample. Everybody had it on a tray, and they walked around and they handed out a sample of water. And we just asked people, if you want to take part of the water that's been provided through the water ceremony, the women's water ceremony, you can. Gone in minutes. The whole tray's about I don't know how many we did, like close to 400 or 500 people. They had all these little cups, and people all just had trays waiting in the wings and just walked out, and they all took a drink of the water, and it's like, say thank you to the water, the water spirits. And at the Credit River, we went in, did 6 o'clock in the morning sunrise ceremony, did the water ceremony, and we thought that, well, maybe we might get 50 people, 250 people. We were busy trying to keep up. People wanted to be part of that, and that so that's good. That's good to know that people want to be part of a water ceremony and pay and be part of saying thank you. So it's a simple little process of saying thank you to the water, taking the water, and um, asking the creator to bless it, and then hand it out, and everybody takes a drink. You've been part of committing yourself to protect the water. So it's a spiritual medicine as well.
Thank you for sharing that. Sounds amazing. You just reminded me, I was having a conversation with somebody from the David Suzuki Foundation, and they have like butterfly ranges all over the. It's the case of like how I can become a ranger and like save the water and kind of a personal commitment. Also, Caroline, I don't know if you know, but on the 21st of June, when we're doing the unveiling of the art piece, Lindsay is also leading a water ceremony for that
Okay.
event on the 21st. So for all of you who are interested in participating, remember on June 21st, we are going to have a water ceremony. I'm going to send you some details in case you would like to participate, because what Caroline is telling us here is basically similar to what Lindsay, who in this case is the lead artist, will be leading us in the water ceremony. And as you mentioned, Caroline, as well, like the importance of women in the process and how a ceremony needs to happen with women. And I think it's also a call that the creation maybe, or is sending us to connect more with the land, with Mother Earth, to be more conscious of, as you mentioned, we had a storm this week and we have some floods happening in Manitoba and in some regions, even in Ontario. There is a community, and the name is similar to Mississaugas. I forgot their name. 3 weeks ago, at the beginning of of May, uh, the houses were flooded and they were not able to, um, you know, to be in their houses because of climate change, because of the environment, because the impact that we're creating. So, thinking about the water and the creation, and also how we not only thank it, but also we also acknowledge the importance of water in our lives. I think that's beautiful, and thank you so much for sharing. I don't know if Christine, any of the Christinas, Daniel, Pearl, anybody else would like to add any comments, any questions, please uh, take advantage. This is a very unique opportunity to have the pleasure and the honor of having Caroline here with us today. So please feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions, or you can also use the chat option as well.
So I wanted to make some comments about the moccasin identifier. You see my
Sure. Yeah, I was
moccasins?
about to ask you because I'm always
Yeah.
curious about the artwork that people hold, and also I see you
Yeah.
have the medicine wheel on the site as well. So
Oh yeah, yeah. That was
amazing.
it's one of our symbols. It's kind of pan, but still it's part of our recognition of the four directions and the roles that they play in our life, and that happens around the world. I was just for some reason I was looking, you get lost in the web, and so there's the Red Sea and the Black Sea over in Middle East and Europe there, and so you think that the Red Sea is called the Red Sea because it's red, okay, or the Black Sea, something there makes it black, but in my digging deeper and reading it, it's because of their directions. So the people there also have a reason to use the colors to identify, something. Maybe you might call that more spiritual, or part of religion or beliefs. And that's so. Now the moccasin identifier is a camp is a it's like an educational and awareness program that we are taking out there in Ontario in our treaty lands, and that it is about treaties, and that's it's all about educating the school system, and we've been focusing on the elementary school. If you went to the website and you typed in moccasin identifier ca, it is or .com, I think it is. It's part of it's all on there. We have free curriculum developed over the teachers and the different curriculum writers, and that we have 4 stencils that represents Ontario linguistically. This is the Anishinaabe stencil, and the our presentation, it covers the Cree in the north, the Anishinaabe, kind of all of Ontario, the Huron-Wendat, which would be in your area, Collingwood north to northern parts of Toronto, out to the east, and then the Seneca Haudenosaunee. And we use that for the education kit because that was the group that came in from the United States to try settle the Toronto or the foot of Southern Ontario, and but they all live here now. The Six Nations are all of the different Haudenosaunee groups, the Confederacy groups they are, and then we have the London has Oneida. Then you get the Six Nations with all of them on there, and you get Wata, which is up in Bala, sort of mid Ontario, Mohawks, and you get the Tyendinaga in Cornwall, which are Mohawks. You get Akwesasne, which is in Cornwall, and then you move into the United or Quebec, and you get Ganawagi and Oka, um, the different all in Haudenosaunee groups there, and so that's our sort of linguistic using the language as the way to identify the groups who were on the land then and still today, and that we go into the schools. They link up with the curriculum and the teacher. They teach the students, or we do this for everybody. So in this case, it's the students about the treaty, about the land, and then we do an interactive. Um, the we have take one of the stencils and we stencil with tempera paint, like non-toxic paint or chalk spray. We stencil, and they produce a moccasin on the ground, on the sidewalk, or when it's inclement, it's on the air, it's on paper. So we're out there doing that. We're just in Toronto last Saturday, week back Saturday, Sunday in the park. We were in Allen Gardens stenciling, and so we stenciled with basically 2-year-olds to seniors. So it crosses all ages, and it's a lot of fun. You get all paint. You kind of can't not get paint on you for some reason or another. Um, but and it's all just about making people aware about whose land they're on. And I say in my speeches that I have a dream too, that this province is going to be covered with moccasin identifiers within the next decade, and they're going to know whose land they're on.
Mhm.
And I was thinking 10 years of 10 more years of education, including our stories, in 10 years of the moccasin identifier, we're going to change the world.
Very inspiring, Caroline. You actually mentioned, I went on the website and it says, they quote you, if we as First Nations peoples don't get a marker on the ground today, we will be lost forever.
Yes.
So thank you so much for sharing. I didn't know about that workshop. It is great for us to know and see how we can engage more with you and with the
Mhm.
program that you're doing. Anybody else would like to add any comments, questions for Caroline today? Okay, I guess like today, the long weekend is still towards the towards the Tuesday. Thank you, Pearl, for your comment. I say thank you for sharing your wisdom, Caroline. So thank you, Pearl, for your comment. And also, um, I would like to know for like to wrap up the session. So when we're talking about water and land and responsibility, has, and this is from a non-indigenous and a non-indigenous person from Turtle Island, but from South America and Colombia. And I'm sorry I introduced you before, but you were out, so that's why. But I usually introduce. I had introduced you before, and I also forgot to introduce myself, going through these technicalities. But it's like knowing that the water is something that we have in common everywhere, and how important it is. Um, so, is there anything in particular that you consider that in 2022 we should be doing or thinking or advocating? Is there any indigenous organization that is currently asking for a petition or that needs some sort of support to ensure that some nations have a drinkable water? What are the action items in a way that we can, as non-indigenous people, but still as settlers and treaty people, to ensure we protect this precious resource?
Yeah, well, when you asked about is there people doing, there's a lot of groups, smaller groups doing. I don't know whether you've heard about the group that's called Water Walkers, and it's women, Josephine Mondabin, and that she took up the cause where she walked around the Great Lakes, dipped water from all of those and carried. And she has passed away, and she just got honored lately for her work, and that other people are carrying it on. So there is a group called Water Walkers, women mainly, that host that, and they go around the areas, and they just literally walk through. They're walking all the time, and they start the next walk. They are always somebody that needs to get promoted and being made aware of. And I don't know how they do the money. I know that we have a member here who supports the Water Walkers and hosts them to come into the community, and they literally just walk through the community carrying a bucket of water to
Wow,
remind people about how important the water is.
wow.
It's
Thank
a
you for
great group.
thank you for sharing. Also, I found an article on CBC Radio. I'm going to post it here for those who would like to learn more about uh, the water walkers for sure.
Mhm.
But if nobody else has any questions, Carolina, I just would like to thank you for your time, for giving us the opportunity to learn from you today. Please let me know what should I do with this tobacco. I can send it your way, or I
Yeah.
can put it with the water as well. I can.
Yeah, we can, because you can, with tobacco, we give tobacco as a thank you and a commitment for sharing our knowledge and stuff, and that you can take that tobacco and put it down for a thank you to the land, and that'd be much appreciated.
Rich,
Yeah,
thank you so much.
yeah,
Thank you so much,
yeah.
Caroline, for joining us today.
Mhm. Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for coming, Christina, with K and with a C, Pearl, Danielle, Leslie as well,
Mhm.
Lindsay, Erica, and Glow. So thank you so much all for joining us. Stay tuned. Remember, today at 6:30 p.m. is the premiere of the video with the second part of a Why We Are Treaty People. And next Thursday, we will have also at 5 p.m. The responsibilities with the water and the land with two other guest speakers. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy.
Okay.
Bye. Thank you.
All right. Bye. Chimigwech.
Jimmy Rich. Thank you so much.
Pamapi.
Bye.